Hello, everybody. It's Leonard Murphy with another edition of our CEO series of interviews. And today I am joined by Sam Peskin, the CEO and co-founder of Early Studies. Welcome, Sam.
Hi, Lenny. How you doing?
I'm doing all right. It's great to have you. Now, a little bit of background. This is going to be a little bit different for the series because Early Studies is also an early company, and a little bit of history. It's kind of the cool moxie of an entrepreneur. Sam had released a second report of data and was targeting folks on LinkedIn and reached out to me, and I downloaded the data. It's like, well, who's this guy? What are they doing? And found it really, really interesting. And then we struck up a dialogue, and here we are now. I don't want to steal Sam's thunder anymore and talking about Early Studies and what you're doing. So, Sam, now there's the softball pitch for you to talk about your origin story.
My origin story, for sure. Well, I guess my career has kind of been a journey of understanding human behavior through different lenses. The last proper job I had, I was part of the founding team of a building. So I was kind of in real estate called 180 Strand, which has become one of the most notable and valued cultural centers in London. I'm kind of working backwards here. That was trying to understand post-COVID people's needs and demands for the spaces that they work in and socialize in, and trying to get to a much deeper level of understanding of what people do when they're in a large building. What do people need when they're looking to create, recreate, socialize, mix with other people, and work? But I came to that having been a solo consultant for 6 years, and previously to that, I was part of the executive team at Vice. I helped to grow Vice from London through Europe and in the Middle East. And that, I guess, was in large part trying to understand the millennial generation that were interacting with media completely differently, had very different thoughts about the world post 2008 and the financial crash. I was also one of them. It feels kind of weird now that everyone talks about Gen Z, that this was talking about millennials, and it wasn't that long ago, but some things have changed, and some of the way that people talk about young people remains the same. But that was trying to help brands to understand a generation whose habits were totally different to what they were used to. Previously to that, I'd grown up in digital ad agencies, brand agencies, and then eventually, I mean, I never had planned on going into research, but in hindsight, it seemed like a natural place where I would have ended up. I came together with a very close friend called Alfred Malmros. We'd known each other about 15 years. He also had been in and around business and marketing in similar fields to me, but we had never worked together. And we started talking about research and consumer insights and trying to understand what we called consumer psychology and better. And it started through the lens of therapy. We were both longtime therapy addicts, and we talked about brand strategy as a very difficult thing to do for yourself, which is kind of similar to therapy. You can't do therapy on yourself. You need a sounding board. And we started to dig into lots of different theories about psychology and therapy techniques, and started thinking about applying them to consumer research. Eventually happened upon the technique of social circle surveying, which is a technique whereby you ask people to reflect on the behaviors and habits and drivers of their friendship circle or their community, the people close to them. And from there, we developed a methodology that we call the Future Perfect methodology, which I can talk to you about in a little bit, which we apply to everything through different lenses and from different angles, but helping both brands and increasingly non-governmental organizations, people in the realm of politics, financial institutions, answer big questions and the nitty-gritty questions about why people behave in the way that they do, but importantly, the things that people lie about, and how to circumvent the things that make people lie, and understand deeper truths and hidden truths that guide people's decision making and behavior.
Very cool. And your story is very familiar to most. There's not many of us that decide to be in this industry. We all, and myself included, we just kind of wind up here. So that's a very familiar story. So the Future Perfect methodology, and I do want to dig into it for the audience. I interpret it as a variation of prediction market approach, which is something that has great credibility, but yet low adoption. It's been one of those challenges in the industry to get people to actually embrace the truth that we are often dishonest, and not purposely. We just, as humans, we social bias, blah blah blah. Tons of reasons why we don't always say exactly what is true, and maybe sometimes, hell, maybe as humans we can't. Maybe we're almost incapable of having that lens of self-reflection. This methodology helps eliminate that, or at least to limit it in many ways. And I've been a big fan for years with multiple companies that have tried to do this. Tell me what that discovery. Well, let's talk about the methodology that you use, and some of the aha moments you've had in deploying that and trying to bring it to market with folks. What has that been like?
Absolutely. So yeah, to talk to the first element of your question, we kind of in a lofty way think of ourselves as entrepreneurs in the lying economy. The
lying economy. That's the first I ever heard that one before, Sam. All right, go ahead.
And I'll break that down for you, but we see the beauty in untruthfulness, and that lying is something that everyone does in order to create and frame their own narratives, their own ways of engaging with the world, to make us feel comfortable in ourselves and our identities every day. But we've really built our methodology around the insight that people are better predictors of others' behaviors than they are of their own. And so Social Circle emanates from political polling. It was invented by a guy practiced by a guy called Christopher Vrij Almström, who's a Swedish philosophy professor who's known to Alfred, who's also Swedish. And he started around the time of the first Trump election, asking, instead of asking people how they were going to vote, asking how they thought their neighbors were going to vote, or how what proportion of their street was going to vote Republican or Democrat, etc. And by doing that, accurately predicted the outcomes of a number of elections in the US and the UK and Europe. And it's come to prominence again in the last US election with a guy that I know that you're familiar with, the French whale, who we've talked about this before, right?
We did, right.
Who in the summer last year, and it's a long read that people can read about in the Wall Street Journal, I think was the first to break the story, where he engaged Kantar, I believe it was, to go in the 7 swing states and ask people how they believed their neighbors were going to vote. He did this, got his data set, I think, by around August, September, knew that if his data was correct, that Trump was going to win by a landslide in all of the 7 swing states, and placed a bet on Polymarket and won $85 million on that bet. So to rewind to when we discovered it, we talked about this idea with Christopher and started thinking about what it would be like, being completely naive to the research industry and not knowing the people. And I've met some people who have practiced it through you and through other people lately, but trying to experiment with what that would look like in consumer research, and trying to look at, if we ask people about others in a number of different ways, would that help us to generate deeper insights, new truths, interesting hidden signals? And we started to practice that I was a solo consultant at that point. Alfred had a startup which he was closing down, which revolved around people asking for advice. It was a marketplace for advice called Anyone. We started to use that on our own consultancy clients. It worked really well. And from there, we started to ladder on more techniques to help us to understand attitudes and sentiments through different time spans. So the first thing Well, the primary thing that we do is we laddered on a technique that we invented called the triple tense technique. So we'll ask a social circle question about 3 points in time. So asking about now, a point in time in the past, and a point in time in the future. And what that allows us to do, when you put that into field with respondents, people, I think, it sets their mind to thinking about a question from a different angle. Obviously, they have to think about multiple different time spans, but the polarities and deltas that you get by asking that can be really, really interesting, and they uncover really fascinating contexts when you then overlay and project, well, if we see a 15% delta between the way that people answer this question today compared to the way that they believe that they would have answered it 5 years ago, then what contributes to that delta? And again, if there's another switch, whether it's up or down, when we project that question into the next 3 years or 5 years, then what's contributing to that? And by filling in those gaps and those gray areas, we can get to really interesting hypotheses about where certain categories are heading, where every data point is headed. And one of the exciting things at the moment is that we're playing with techniques for how we visualize those data shifts. So how can we put that in a visual language that effectively creates a kind of visual archetype or an artifact for a data point that's heading to a specific point, has come from a specific point. So those can be decreasing, increasing. They can feel like bubbles. They can feel like horizons, where you get a gently rising tide of consumer sentiment going in a particular direction. And what we find, kind of inspired by prediction markets, is that we're not looking for accuracy in terms of being able to predict future events, but understanding what people believe is going to happen helps us to contextualize and understand their actions today, because people act on their expectations of tomorrow rather than their experience of today. And so between those time spans, we are able to generate a lot of granularity in the data. And when we are able to then plug in the expertise and experience and knowledge of the partners that we're working with, we can create very compelling and interesting narratives for where that data is coming from.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'm just thinking as we're talking that there are other examples of the application of this general approach, particularly in political polling, but also betting markets as a whole, right, is a variation of this, and the idea of the wisdom of the crowd. The challenge has been, from a commercial standpoint, of reaching scale. And I think part of that has been the heuristics of this approach versus your traditional approach are radically different. So the application, let's say, so one of the companies that I had worked with, and I introduced you to Brad Marsh, shout out to Brad Marsh, and the company that he was working with, where brands found it challenging to adapt in a specific business case. So let's say BASIS, right? A standard kind of approach for innovation and understanding adoption of future products. Those things become currency within an organization, right? That is the standard heuristic they compare to. When something comes along and challenges that,
yeah, that
can be really tough, because they've built their entire approach around a very specific modality. It doesn't mean that modality is wrong, it is just different. So what I like about what you're doing is applying it towards, at the highest level, what I would say is trend spotting. So, right, you're looking at future trends and then backing into, again, tell me if I'm wrong, on how those trends may impact commercially a brand in that case. And that seems like a good backdoor into folks, so that they don't have to challenge their existing approaches per se, but it's fit for purpose for a business issue that has been challenging, which is predicting. Is that did I capture that correctly? And have you kind of found
Yeah,
the experience?
I think so. And a couple of points on that. I think we operate on the basis that data that doesn't travel within an organization may as well not exist. And we know that from our experiences, our various experiences being within organizations and working with data providers and research partners, organizations. We have a philosophy with early studies that we will not challenge or attempt to replace all of the data that organizations currently run on, because it's, firstly, I think we refer to what we do sometimes as experimental polling, and that itself has an implicit caveat. We're playing around and trying to find hidden signals in consumer sentiment and behavior that can be crucial data points and crucial signals for businesses to pay attention to, whether that guides a certain decision or whether it becomes a signal that they want to track over time. And so it's about, I guess, applying a certain amount of lateral thinking to the types of metrics that companies traditionally rely on to understand their performance, how they're doing, how they're being perceived, how they relate to other competitors in the market and in their category. I'm kind of on the way to answering your question, but I think, and in terms of application, we split. I mean, we apply the methodology effectively in three different ways. So firstly, there's exploration, where we will be tasked by a marketing team or a business unit to explore something from first principles that they're trying to get a better understanding of. And a lot of the time they're coming to us because they have a lot of data within the organization, but some of that data isn't necessarily directly applicable to this specific problem they're trying to solve. I think that it's somewhat an advantage for us that we come from entrepreneurial and business backgrounds, in that we've been in the business of solving complex business problems for our careers, and we're kind of Aravistas to the research space, but we apply that expertise and those techniques to getting to the questions that are going to help to unlock new opportunities and unlock actionable and interesting answers to that problem. That's exploration. Then on the other side, there's testing. I think in our careers, we found that often with testing an idea or an approach or a new kind of messaging or a platform, that often you would be in the lap of the gods in terms of the subjectivity of respondents, and you often, to give you another problem that we encountered, you would only get one shot at figuring out what consumer response is to that particular initiative or platform, etc. And I guess the answer is, firstly, Social Circle is a great unlock for that, because instead of relying on the subjectivity and instinctive reactions of people, we ask people to imagine someone they know who's in the target audience for a specific brand or product or messaging platform, and we ask them how they believe they would respond to that piece of comms or any of the other things. But also, we work in a very iterative manner, in that we test. We will come from a brief and test on small sample sizes. Again, kind of coming at every problem like curious children, and being prepared to ask the most fundamental questions that don't get asked because people, they assume that they know the answers to them. And in that is kind of how, sorry about that. That was just a
no worries.
I'd silenced my phone, but it managed to get through in any case from my computer. And so that's testing. We really take a first principles approach to everything that we do, and the way that we apply the methodology to be most effective. Also innovation. We're getting a lot of requests for going into innovation processes at the very beginning and trying to understand how people perceive or conceive that a product, who a product is targeted to, and whether they believe that it's a product for them. And by doing that from a number of different angles, we can spot emerging gaps in where a client's gaps in the client portfolio, gaps in a specific product category, identify the opportunity, and then working again with surveys and consumer research to figure out what the best way to execute on that gap is.
So in the business, you're effectively structured as a strategic consultancy built around a specific tool, right? Rather than, so when you first sent the report, I thought, oh, you're productizing trends identification. But as we're talking more, it sounds like it is far more customized and strategically focused than just having another trend forecasting product out there. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I would say that's true. It's interesting because Alfred and I have this conversation and debate a lot of the time. I guess we positioned ourselves as a consultancy initially. Really, we kind of see ourselves as a startup. We're implementing technology and AI through all of our processes to figure out ways that we can be sharper, leaner. I mean, AI has been great for us because we haven't had to retrofit anything that we do to build AI into it. We've kind of built it as part of built the business with AI as part of the foundations. But I say that we think of ourselves as a startup because we're trying to find smart and often technologically enabled ways to tackle the problems that we see in our own processes, and tackle and to execute as best we can on the opportunity that we saw in the market.
Yeah. So let's talk about the AI thing for a second. Specifically so there's a lot of woo-woo to this topic, right? Potentially, there's less places we can go, and at the core, I would say, my current perspective is that this approach works because of, let's call it intuition, for lack of a better term, right? Which I consider to be a unique human attribute tied to our consciousness field, right? You can go all kinds of places with that, but that's just kind of my general take. That's for smarter people than me to unpack.
Me too.
Yeah, okay. But that brings up an interesting question, though, of because there's lots of discussion around synthetic sample and personas, and those are things that AI is good at based upon the inputs. Have you tested building personas off of your data? Because at this point, you've amassed a fairly large normative data set to train an AI persona to go through the same approach to try and predict specific outcomes, and if so, what does that look like?
Well, one thing is so I can answer that question in a couple of different ways. Yes, like we have experimented with it and with synthetic audience samples, and we tend to use them as benchmarks. So we can take a client problem, create a survey, and it's great to test it on one of our synthetic samples to see where it lands, but we would never rely on that as the final answer. I think it's interesting to see where AI gets to, and a lot of the time it can be more accurate on specific metrics, like AI is likely to get an awareness metric pretty bang on, whereas human beings, when they're talking about the perceptions of others, are likely to underestimate how aware the market is of a specific brand. There are brands, let's say in the US, that probably have 97% awareness ratings, and people will never estimate it at that high.
Sure.
But once you get down to the deeper nuances and the knotty psychological questions that we're trying to untangle, AI can have very interesting lateral approaches to those problems, but is never going to get close to the nuance and understanding that we get from a really high quality human sample. So using the two alongside each other and being able to triage them and get an average out of both of them is useful. It keeps us honest, and it also keeps us curious, and we play with it. But for us, AI, especially given that the endpoint for us is always quant, we often start with open-ended qual, with open-ended fundamental questions to see how people will talk about a specific subject, and are always prepared to be surprised by what's coming up. The output eventually is always quant, and once we have a quant data set, the analysis that we're able to do with AI is extremely compelling.
Sure.
Especially when you think about an answer that's projected into the future. When we put that in and ask AI to analyze what is projected into the future and what people's concerns, hopes, dreams about the next 3 years might be based on, we can get not just an estimation of what's coming to play there, but also a potentially more longitudinal data points on how that data point might shift over the next 3 years, even on a monthly basis.
Sure, I get that. Okay,
so that's really interesting. And then in the front end, we are able to use AI to get pretty close to what's a good enough quality survey for us to start sending into testing. But again, we will work iteratively with that, looking at the results and analyzing, and the human brain comes into play a lot more when we're trying to think of the most creative angles to come at a question from, and how we're going to get to hidden signals and nuances. AI is helpful, but it doesn't get us all the way there.
I think it's fascinating, and I love that when entrepreneurs come in from outside, right? We're talking like the core ideas that you've been talking about have been knotty issues that many people have taken a run at, with various levels of success for many years. But the way that you've approached it from your background, and kind of reverse engineered that, plus now, as you said, not having to be to kind of retrofit new tools like AI, but to be able to integrate that in so that it's an augmentation. I just love that. I think that's fantastic, and should be inspiring to many folks to think about this era of reinvention. And I think, like any, see if you agree with me, your approach was not to come in and say, oh, this sucks and we can do it better. It's simply to say, there's a great foundation here. Now let's see what we can do to refine it, and unlock even more value out of some of these tools that have just been kind of sitting here. Is that a pretty fair assessment?
100%. Yeah. I think, it's funny because when I listen to myself speaking to you, I'm sort of in the back of my mind thinking, like, are these things that are completely obvious to anyone that might be much deeper in the research industry than I am, and probably are thinking about the same things? I just don't know. And we are learning every day about the industry that we've come into. I'm actually at IAX in DC next week. I'm really looking forward to meeting some folks and talking to them about the kinds of problems that they're trying to tackle. I think that, yeah, we've come at it from a business perspective, an entrepreneurial perspective, and a deeply curious mindset, of asking the right questions in order to get to better questions, and starting from first principles with every question that we pose ourselves, and every question we're posed on a client project, and that relates to the eventual questions, but also questions around challenges around process and our end product, and how it's built, and how it can be most impactful and most effective for the partners and organizations that we're working with. I think both Alfred and I take that approach to life and business. And so for us, the most fun is when we take who we are and apply it in a field that we come into with absolutely no idea about.
Yeah.
And it increases, it continues to be fun and a learning experience every day. But as we grow, we're paying a lot of attention to what's happening in the wider research industry, and trying to reach out to people and have the discussions that are going to help us to feel like we belong here.
Yeah. Well, I think you definitely belong here. So then hence why we're having this conversation, right? I mean, for the audience, after Sam reached out on LinkedIn, we actually have had multiple conversations, several false starts to get this interview done because the gods of the internet were frowning on us every time we tried. But anyway, so through this conversation that we've had to get to here, obviously I'm a fan of what you're doing. So and I think that it's the type of creativity and ingenuity that we need because we are in disruptive times. So for variety at every level, like everything is just kind of weird and different and changing, and that's just okay. That's great, or not, depending upon your perspective. But it creates opportunity, and I think that so often we get in any industry, but certainly in the research industry, we get caught up in our own tunnel vision, our own myopia on whether it's an orthodoxy, really, of this is how you do this, and this specific thing, right? Whether it's methodology or a business issue, this is how you do pricing. This is how you do, ad tests, et cetera, et cetera. And that does not mean that's all great. It's worked really well, but it doesn't mean it's the ultimate destination. And so I love when folks like you come in and just kind of poke holes with the appropriate level, and this is what I get from you, of humility, of kind of recognizing, hey, we stand on the shoulders of giants, right? There's lots of information here, and for us to build off of, but not with. But humility doesn't need to equal acceptance, right? When we have ideas that can challenge the status quo and make things better, then having that bravery to go after that is how everything moves forward. So anyway, so I love what you guys are doing. Love, how other companies that take similar approaches. I want to be conscious of your time, and as we have proven through other conversations, you and I can go off on tangents and chat because it's just a lot of fun. For other entrepreneurs that are listening, kind of share your lessons that you have learned that up to date that you'd want to pass on to kind of give them warnings, inspiration, whatever the case may be.
I think that, I've probably said this word at least 4 or 5 times in this conversation, but curiosity is the lifeblood of what we do. I think it's also the North Star of how we hire and the people that we want to have around us in our business, and also the people that we work with in partnership. We look for people who will never stop asking why, and that's kind of how we're wired. I think on top of that, from my own personal experience, is that mentors are a shortcut to wisdom, and the quicker you can find the appropriate mentors and to really find the people that fit the kind of shape that you need and have variety, those are the people that I rely upon to help cover over the gaps in my knowledge and to help inspire me to thinking about direct. It's like you said something just before about entrenched ways of thinking and thinking about things, not necessarily knowing what the outcome of the destination is. That's incredibly helpful, but a lot of the time you need people to channel you, sometimes to narrow your focus, but also others who are going to widen it, because even in our journey of trying to figure out who we are and what we do, and all of the best applications, most exciting applications of what we do, sometimes you go too narrow and someone can find someone with more experience than you from a parallel industry or knowledge set will take you in a different direction. So older, more experienced mentors have been crucial to me, and I would say I wish that I had them earlier on in my career. I had a few, but now I'd say I have a great set really interesting people that I can talk to all the time. And I would take the same attitude to reading. I studied literature at university and wish that I'd taken more advantage of the time that I had to sit and read. And now, I mean, I have 2 young kids. I eke out time to be alone and to read all the time. But I think being intentional about your attitude to what you read is super important. To read incredibly broadly and to find rabbit holes to go down at the appropriate times. But I read a lot of history. History is crucial to the way that I see the world. Some business books, some novels. But it is one of my mentors who's a barrister in the UK, says to me, the books are the thing, and you can never forget the thing. And those are the mentors that you can always have on your bookshelf. And so, yeah, mentors and reading, mentors, reading, and curiosity, I guess. Not if anyone were to ask me what my lessons are, but yeah,
those are important ones.
I remember, Lenny, you asked me about an application of the methodology, or like a concrete case of when it's come up, which I didn't manage to answer. And so I'll give you an answer as a finishing thing. We were working with a large challenger brand in the performance space. This was right at the beginning when we had started to test the future perfect methodology and the triple tense technique. But we were asking the most fundamental first principles questions about why people run. And we eventually got to a quant question in the right options, where people were, unsurprisingly, people's primary motivation for running was their physical health. This was in 2023. But we saw that in the 3-year period from now until 2027, this was 2026, 27, mental health had started to replace physical health as a primary driver. And this was 2 years ago. And we can see that in the market now, and you can see that with the way that the challenger brands are positioning themselves against the legacy brands in terms of holistic wellness versus that harder performance-based messaging, and starting to be incredibly successful. It was really one of those first moments when we started to get extremely excited about the potential for the methodology, because we saw it and believed it to be true, but couldn't believe that it was actually crystallizing and materializing in the data.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of liftoff for us. It was when it really began. So I just wanted to, in case anyone thought that everything was too theoretical and ephemeral, and that I might be selling snake oil, that was an example that I realized I hadn't come to giving you yet.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, again, I think that for people who doubt, the example of the French whale is a fairly concrete example, and this methodology has proven itself in polling time and time again. There's a pollster here in the U.S., and I just can't think of the name, and I apologize for that. That for years has used this methodology and was incredibly accurate. They were dismissed by kind of the mainstream approaches at their peril, because they kept getting it wrong and he kept getting it right. So anyway, so I think it's not snake oil. Widening that lens to look at trends and try and understand very dynamic, changing humanity at this point, right? I think there are so many inputs that have a long tail effect that we are just beginning to even get glimmers of.
And especially at the moment, we're in a very volatile time when there's a lot of sectors where prediction accuracy is starting to become more mission critical than ever. Sure. And we're starting to see a lot of demand from those sectors. So financial services, politics. And so I guess getting back to the heartland of where techniques like the ones we're using and prediction markets were born out of, it's good to be where we're gravitating back towards. Again, we are not 20 years in the tooth political pollsters, but we're really excited to be using the methodology in those spaces and starting to get to grips with the data that will give us answers to the really big, important questions about culture and society and where we're headed at the moment.
Well, and even more, it's one thing to predict an outcome, but to understand, why that outcome. That, to me, that is far more important. I think I'm pretty good at predicting. I suck at predicting timing. I'm pretty good at predicting events. I'm bad at predicting the timing. But the fascinating part is through my own process of trying to understand why, right? When you mentioned history, right? Of, looking at that to understand how we got here, I think is far more important than where the destination is itself. Anyway, we could go off on all types of places. Sam,
for another session.
Yeah, absolutely. This all just is fascinating. I will say this, and listeners, you can think that I'm weird as whatever, but there is something that I am picking up in the zeitgeist right now around how we are thinking about human consciousness. And this is part of that, whatever we call it, right? That sounds like a highfalutin term, but how we as humans share and exchange information unconsciously. There's a lot happening about that right now, and it's really interesting. And I think that we're heading towards a time in a time where approaches like yours to try and understand how we as humans intake information, output information, both passively and actively, and how that shapes the course of global events we're on a threshold of doing some just really cool stuff to understand that. And I think it's going to be radically different than the perception that we have had up to date on how things are going. So that gets my geek buttons going in all types of ways. And it's a fascinating concept. Tools like yours are part of that journey that I see happening. So anyway, there we go.
Great to hear, Lenny. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Sam, where can people find you?
You can email me at sam@earlystudies.com. If you go to earlystudies.com, you will find quite a mysterious website that just where you can flick through a whole bunch of the interesting questions that we've asked in our time on Earth so far. I'm on LinkedIn, Sam Peskin. And please do reach out. I'm always willing to up for connecting with like-minded people and people in the industry. So yeah, come at me.
Great. Come at me, bro. All right. The challenge accepted by somebody, I'm sure. Sam, thanks for taking the time. Really appreciate it. And audience, thank you for your time. Without that, Sam and I wouldn't have done this. So we appreciate the opportunity to bring this to you. Thanks to our sponsors, our producers, everybody who works behind the scenes to make this happen. And that's it for this edition of the CEO series. And we'll be back again real soon. Everybody take care. Bye-bye.